apologize for not being with you in person, but we'll try it this way and see how it goes. I was asked to talk about what's happened with the judicialization of the cases since the annulment of the amnesty law in 2016. So I want to talk first about a couple of cases and then talk about some of the challenges to bringing these cases forward. There have been very few cases that have moved forward. That's the first thing to say. Pretty much all of them have been cases that were brought before the amnesty law was put into effect and have now been reopened. There are practically no new cases that are going forward. Of the ones that have been reopened, they're pretty much all large-scale massacre cases from 1981 and 1982. I'm not going to talk about the Jesuit case. I'm going to leave that to my colleague Almudena. I'm also not going to talk about the case of Monsignor Romero, which is slightly different. Although it has been reopened, not much has happened. Most of the activity has been around a couple of massacre cases, especially the El Mozote case. El Mozote is a very large massacre, probably the largest in Latin America, that took place in December of 1981 in a number of villages around northern Morazan. About 1,000 people were killed, a majority of them were children. The case was originally brought in 1990, and when the amnesty law was passed in 1993, it was suspended. There was an effort to open it in the mid-2000s, didn't work because of the amnesty law. Once the amnesty was annulled, in September of that year, a local judge in Gotera in northern Morazan did reopen the case. He invited the defendants, who are members of the High Command, the surviving members of the Atlacatl Brigade and of the 3rd Brigade out of San Miguel, and a couple of others, to come and give a statement. Most of them showed up eventually, but even though some of them looked like they really wanted to talk, their lawyers told them not to say anything, so they didn't actually give statements. There was then some backing and forthing over a number of months. The defendants were using the same sort of dilatory tactics that we've seen in Guatemala and elsewhere, filing a frivolous appeal about whether the lawyers for the victims actually could represent the victims. It took 6 months for that to work its way through the courts, and it's only been in the last few months that the case has actually moved forward. The judge decided to hear testimony from the people who had given their testimony in 1991, the eyewitnesses and survivors. And they've been hearing these witness testimonies. They've asked people to come forward and first of all ratify what they said in 1991, and then also expand if they want to on what they said then. And these have been very moving and very difficult testimonies, especially a lot of these people are now elderly. It's very hard for them to come. The defendants have taken the position that all the bodies found in El Mozote were guerrillas and that this was an FMLN cemetery, or alternatively, everyone who was killed were actually guerrillas. The forensic evidence kind of makes nonsense of that argument, but that's what they continue to do. So the next steps there, the judge has asked for the military to provide documents. As I'll mention later, the military says they don't have any documents. The judge has said basically that he believes there was a massacre, that he believes that civilians were killed. The problem that he has in not issuing arrest warrants has been that he says he's not convinced of the individual responsibility of each of the people who is named in the complaint. And he wants to see more on chain of command, on individual responsibility, etc. Of course, the military is being singularly uncooperative with that kind of investigation. There's also a couple of other cases. El Calabozo, which is another massacre from 1982, has been reopened, but not very much has happened. There have been a couple of other massacre cases that have been reopened, but really most of the action has been around El Mozote. So, challenges. Well, first challenge is it's been a long time. These are from 1981 and 82. So the defendants, the witnesses, everybody is old. Many of them have passed. Many of them are sick. What to do about testimony from eyewitnesses who are no longer with us is an issue. This has given a certain urgency to the process. It needs to happen soon before more people get sick or pass. Second, there are some procedural complications. The judge in Mozote, and the courts have approved this, has made a distinction between those cases that started before the amnesty law went into effect and those that didn't. For the ones that started before the amnesty law, those are being reopened, and so the argument is that they should use not only the substantive law of the time of the events, but the procedural law of the time when the case was initially filed. That means the old 1973 Criminal Procedure Code, that code has subsequently been changed. There are good reasons why it was changed. It's a terrible code. So what the judge has said is, given that, what he's going to do is apply the old code, but then supplement it with the provisions of the new code that are required to make sure that the process doesn't violate constitutional or international law standards on due process. And no one's quite clear on how that's going to work. Nonetheless, there we are. The advantage of doing that is that the old code had a much greater investigatory role for the judge and a smaller investigatory role for the prosecutor, as opposed to the current procedural code, which puts all the power in the hands of the prosecutor. That takes me to my next challenge. The prosecutor's office has been enormously passive on these cases. Now, this is an improvement from the last Attorney General, who was actively opposed to the cases. So passivity is a move in the right direction, but it's not good enough. There has been very little in the way of support from the prosecutor's office. They've made no motions, they've presented no evidence, they've done no investigation of their own. Everything is coming from the lawyers for the victims who are allowed to participate in the criminal law process in El Salvador. And they are the ones who are asking for evidence, who are providing witnesses, etc. The prosecutor has created a special unit that is supposed to be working on these cases. It has 2 or 3 people in it. None of them are specialists in international criminal law or in complex criminal cases. And they have to date not been the driving forces. There's a worry that with the new cases, because the prosecutor's office has the much more of a role to play, that those cases will move very slowly, if at all. There's also stonewalling from the military. The military says it has no documents, everything's been destroyed, nobody believes them, but it's very hard to figure out how to move forward when they keep saying that. And finally, there are some political challenges. Unlike many other places in Latin America, here neither side in the armed conflict actually wants these cases to be tried. Now, on the part of the military and the party that supported the death squads, that's understandable. It's less understandable on the part of the FMLN, given that many of the people who supported them, are people who were caught up in some of these military actions. Nonetheless, they have not been particularly supportive of prosecutions. They've been much better on other ways of dealing with the past. They have supported the creation of a commission to search for the disappeared. They have gone and talked to victims and asked for pardons in a number of cases. They have tried to provide small pensions for a few people who are survivors. But on the judicialization of the cases, they have been quite hostile. Part of this may be because there are some members of the FMLN, including the current president, who may have some responsibility in some of the crimes that were committed by the FMLN during the armed conflict. The Truth Commission found that those were a very small proportion of the crimes. Nonetheless, they do exist, and there may be sort of outsized fear that these cases could be brought to justice as well. So this will be a hard process going forward. There will be a lot of attempts by the defendants to try to just slow things down, to delay. And it will be hard to get the cases through arrest warrants to trial and conviction. It will be really necessary to have international support as well as support within the country of a wide range of actors in order to make this happen. Thanks.